and get started. Today we're going to cover a couple of the wizards that we hadn't had a chance to cover before, along with some expanded access rights rules. In our operation permissions, we'll take a look at lookups, our system settings, and a couple of other customization features. I can see we do have a question before I begin, so let's talk a little bit about that before we dive back into the training. We have someone asking, I created a section to test the process, but I'm now unable to find a way to remove the created section. Can you help me with that? Sure. If you remember from yesterday's training, one of the things I mentioned is the inadvisability of deleting columns from an object. This goes doubly for the objects themselves. Typically speaking, you do not want to remove them. What we can do, however, is we can hide these objects, for example, this newly created section, from being seen or used by anyone. And there are a couple of ways we can do that. We can make it invisible via our access permissions. For example, we can simply revoke access permission rights to anyone for that section. So if I go into my object permissions here, I can go ahead and try to find the section that I'd created. Set it to be managed by operations. And once it is, simply remove all applicable rules. So if I set it to manage by operations, this of course corresponds to access to object. And I can simply change the all employee rules to have X's across the board. What this will do will be to remove any user's access rights to the section, making it functionally invisible. So that's one way of removing the section without harming the database integrity by actually deleting it. Another thing we can do is simply use our workplace setup. This is something we haven't looked at yet, but we will get into today, and I can actually remove it from a workplace, meaning that it will be impossible to access from the workplaces in my section pane. And so those are the two kind of advised methods of removing an unneeded section. Again, deleting tables from the database is not recommended. Though if you do absolutely need to, we're going to see a little later today how we can actually go into the deep guts of the site and delete objects directly from the database itself. But most of the time, either removing it from the workplaces or revoking access rights to the section in question is more than enough for practical purposes. All right. So let's get on with today's training. Now, to recap a little bit about where we left off yesterday, we just finished covering our section wizard. Though we have two more wizards to go through. That is the detail wizard and the mobile application wizard. As always, if you do have any questions about any of the functionality that I'm showing, feel free to let me know via the chat pane. I'll take a couple of moments after each section to answer your questions. So with that said, let's go ahead and dive right into our detail wizard. A detail, for those that don't remember, is a group of fields that present with this little plus sign. For example, something like noteworthy events, connected to, addresses, and so on. And these are all details. A detail is a separate object in the database. You can think of it as a separate table entirely. However, unlike a section, a detail exists only by connection to an existing section. Now, creating a detail does take a little bit of background tinkering, a little bit of technical expertise. So I'll try to go as slowly as possible so people don't get too confused. Let's say, for example, that I have a need to track social media information for my accounts. Let's say that I'm a marketing firm and one of the services my marketing firm provides is social media reputation management. And on an account page, maybe I'll make a new tab for it called social networks. I'm going to want to track the social media information. And I want a detail that's going to keep track of Facebook likes, of Twitter followers, of Instagram subscribers, and so on. Now, I can't just open up my section wizard and hit that new detail button. I'll show you why in a moment. All right, so here I've opened up the section wizard. I want to create this new detail. So I'm going to create a new tab for it. Hit the plus sign here to create a new tab called social media. Hit save. And you'll notice I have this handy button called new detail. When I click on it, well, I don't actually see anywhere how I can actually create a new detail from this button. This is actually part of step 3 of creating a new detail. So we're going to go, now that we have this tab created, that's all we can do here. I cannot create a detail from this new detail button. We will see how it's used later on. All right, so I have to tackle this issue from another direction. I'm again going to go to my system designer here. And I see underneath the section wizard something called the detail wizard. Well, this must be it. So I'm going to open up my detail wizard. And once again, there doesn't seem to be a way for me to create a new detail. It's telling me select properties for a detail, and it's telling me to choose a detail. So this can't be where the detail is created either. Remember that I've mentioned that a detail is actually a separate object. What we have to do to create a detail in step 1 is actually to create an entirely new object and then use our detail wizard and our new detail button to actually craft it. We'll see what I mean in just a moment. We're already familiar with the access rights section here in our advanced settings. This is the same thing that I see when I click on the advanced settings button here underneath the admin area subheader, and the same thing that I see when I click object permissions. Both of these buttons take me to the exact same place. So this identical. But what I really need is not the Access Rights tab, but the Configuration tab, the tab right next to it. Now, if you're not a developer, this section isn't that interesting to us. We're going to go back to it because there are some things as analysts that we should know about the Configuration tab. But for now, we're going to focus pretty much just on creating a new object. I want you first to take a look at something called the package. So here we have package. It's called custom. And you could see a lot of different folders with a bunch of names. These folders, you might notice, are all in gray as opposed to this custom package, which is black. Gray packages are folders of functionalities that come with the product itself. We'll discuss packages a little more later. For now, just remember that all of your custom creations, any fields, any new details, and new sections that you create, or even any new business processes are all going to be found here in this custom folder. And conversely, if we want to add any customizations, they will also be stored in the custom folder. You might see an action bar here on the left-hand side. Again, don't pay any attention to it just yet. But again, to a little later. All I want to focus on for now is the following. Up here where you see schemas, external assemblies, SQL scripts, data, package dependencies, right below you should see a toolbar with the following tools: add, edit, and delete. Click the add button, and one of your options is going to be to add an object. To kind of understand what we're doing, you can think about the system not as this site with sections, but instead think of it as a bunch of different spreadsheets. Each spreadsheet is a table of its own. And all of these tables are linked together. That's kind of what we refer to when we talk about the database. An object can also be thought of as a separate table. And since a detail is a separate object, in other words, it's a separate table, it's a separate spreadsheet from our existing sections, we need to first create this new table in the object designer. Again, what I did was I went to the advanced settings here. Then I navigated to the configuration tab at the top, made sure I selected the custom folder, and hit the add button and chose object. You'll notice we can also add replacing objects, source codes, modules, and so on. But as analysts, really the only thing we care about are adding objects. All right, so now we have this entirely new table that we have designed. And that might seem like a little bit of a daunting task, but it's actually pretty straightforward. Before we do anything, though, let's set up some initial settings. Click on the Settings option in the upper right-hand corner. And you'll notice the Object Designer Settings screen pop up. What we want to do is select the following: Show System Columns and Show Entire List of Column Types. Then go ahead and hit OK. That's going to give us a little bit more flexibility in creating this new object. All right. Now click on the User Entity 1 listing here and the Structure side of the window. So we have the Structure pane. I can click on User Entity 1. I can see it selected, and my Properties pane is filled out with some object properties. The first is the name, and do note that it is prefixed by the USR prefix. So let's call this USR Social Network Detail. And its title will, of course, be Social Networks. The package it's stored in is, of course, going to be the custom package. Next, we need to make sure that this object has all of the basic columns that it needs to function. All objects in BPM Online have a set number of basic columns before they can be used. In order to get these basic columns, we need to inherit them from a parent. In this case, our parent is something called the base object. You'll notice actually that we have a couple of options for a base object: our base object with position, base object for unprocessed enriched data, base object in process, base object with notes. We really only care about the base object with no extra details. Let's go ahead and select the base object. You're going to notice that we're given a question. Use the base object as the parent object for the current object. Go ahead and click yes. When you do, you'll notice that the columns here now can be expanded with some inherited columns. These inherited columns are, in fact, the basic columns all objects in BPM Online need to function. They are ID, created on, created by, modified on, and modified by, and process listeners. Now, most of these fields are probably pretty self-explanatory. But one to keep a note of is the ID field. This is possibly one of the most important fields in any section, in any object, but one that you're pretty much never going to see in the interface. You will use it a lot in business processes. You might use it when setting up dynamic case management, but otherwise you're never going to see it. The ID column is a value assigned to every single record in BPM Online, and it is a completely unique value. No matter what the record is, you can always identify it by its ID value. It will never overlap with any other record. By using a record's ID value, we can specifically point to a record. Without having to create ever narrower filtrations or what have you, we can simply specify the ID. And the ID is going to play a huge role later on in our business processes. But for now, just keep in mind that the ID value is a unique value appended to every single record in the system. All right, once we've added the inherited columns, we have to add a couple of columns of our own. By the way, there's nothing else we really have to do here in the structure itself, unless we want to enable access rights from on the object level, but it really doesn't make a difference where we set up access rights at this point. So our next step is going to add a couple of more columns in addition to the inherited columns that we have. Since a detail is a separate object that is a separate table from the actual section the detail appears in, we need some way to associate this table with the section that we want the detail to appear on. We do that by associating by using an associated lookup. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to right-click on the column section. And you'll notice that I'm given a couple of options: add, delete, up, and down. If I hover over add, you're going to see that I have a whole bunch of columns that I can add to this object. In fact, I have a whole bunch of columns that are actually not otherwise accessible to me if I'm using the section wizard. For example, I'm not limited to just float or decimal type fields. I can add currency fields. I can add image links. I can add a color picker. I can add encrypted text strings and so on. So if I ever want to add a type of field that isn't present in my section wizard, I have to add it first on the object level. In this case, though, I don't want to add any special kind of columns. What I want to do is add a lookup type field. This lookup is going to be entitled account, since I want this detail to be present in my account section. So I'm going to call it account. Its name is going to be USR account. It is not multi-line. I'm not creating a new lookup. I'm instead creating a lookup that's going to correspond to the account section. So I'm going to, in my lookup, specify that it is account. I don't care if it's cascaded. I don't care if it's a list. It doesn't have to be required. No default value. Make copy check. Sure, I can leave all that alone. Now, from here, if I'd like, I can add additional columns immediately to my social network detail. But I'd rather do that in the detail wizard properly when I'm setting up the page. So in order for my object to work, really, this is all I have to do. I've created my user social network detail object. I've made sure that it has all the correct inherited columns, and that I have a lookup corresponding to the section that I want this detail appearing in. From here, all I need to do is now publish. So don't just hit the little floppy icon in the upper left-hand corner. What you want to do is actually click on the little arrow button and choose publish. And this will take a couple of moments. So let's give the system a couple of moments to create this new table. As we were waiting, I see we have a question. Could you please explain a little bit about exactly what a parent object is? Um, sure. A parent object can be understood to be a template for the object that you're creating. So when you're inheriting columns from a parent object, you're not really doing anything to the parent. Instead, you're taking the columns that the parent object has and using that as a template for your newly created table. In the case of creating new details, you use the base object as the parent because you want to inherit the basic columns needed for a table to function in the BPM Online system. Let's see, we have another question. Maybe I missed this. Why would one use a detail rather than just creating columns in a section? You want to use details whenever you want to store multiple records of something. For example, let's take the social network detail. Let's say that I want to store on my account section snapshots of social networking performance on certain dates. So on the 17th of July, I want to see my social network performance. Then in a month, I want to take another social media snapshot and see how my likes and so on have changed over time for this specific account. Remember that a column can only store a single value at a time. Because I want to store multiple values, I need to create a whole new detail to hold that information. If I just create a column called, for example, Facebook likes, well, I can change that every time the Facebook likes change, but I'm not going to be able to see any historic kind of map or be able to keep multiple Facebook like entries. Can we use the same detail in different sections? Yes, we can. All we need to do is to make sure that we have lookups that correspond to all of the different sections that we want to show this detail in. All right. So there we go. We've completed our new detail. Is it normal to take that much time to publish? Yes, it is. Whenever you're creating a new object, the system has to actually create a whole new table in the database. That does take time. Would you use it for something like addresses? Actually, that's exactly what you would use details for. I would use details for storing stuff like addresses. I would use details to store stuff like phone numbers, anything where I need to keep multiples of some value. I do need to keep. Regarding the speed of publishing, it's going to take a bit of time regardless. Depending on the system, it's all very temperamental. Publishing might take a couple of moments. It might take a couple of minutes. It's very much up to the current setup of the system and the current network performance and so on. So if you are creating these new details and so on, do try to do this in some maintenance hours or before launch, because again, it will impact user performance if you're doing it during working hours. If you can use it in multiple sections, why are contact address and account address separate details? That's because contacts and accounts may have separate addresses entirely. For example, I might know John Smith's home address, but that's not something I care about if I'm looking at global company where John Smith works. John Smith's home address is not going to be an address that I associate with global company and his place of employment. All right, so now that we've created this new object, we can actually see here in our custom package at the bottom, user social network detail called social networks. Perfect. All right, what I'm going to want to do next is I'm going to, now that I've created the table in the database, I need to create an interface wrapper for it. So I've created it in the database, now I have to create in the interface. And this is where our detail wizard here underneath the system setup subheader is actually going to come into play. So let's open it up. Again, before we only saw a quick reference to it. Now let's take a closer look. So the object is going to be the newly created detail that we made, so social networks. And I'm going to give it the same name as the object name, so social networks and social networks. Now, before I hit save, do not hit save yet. Instead, click over to the page, since we need to create the actual layout of the detail now. From here, I can see again the same exact page editor or page designer that I had in my section wizard. So let's think about what columns I want to create. Note, I do not have to drag out the account column to the interface. It can exist happily in the database without anyone seeing it. We're going to see exactly how we're going to use the account column to associate this detail with the account section a little later on. For now, let's just go ahead and create a couple of new fields. So probably the first thing that I'm going to want is this created on field, because I am going to care when this record was created. Next, I'm probably going to put in a couple of integer fields. For example, Facebook likes. It doesn't have to be required. I can check the make copy box if I'd like and just hit save. I'm also probably going to want Twitter likes or Twitter followers. And finally, let's say Instagram subscribers or YouTube subscribers. These are all nice whole numerical values. This is probably enough for me. maybe I'm creating this detail so later on, let's say I have a developer whip up a web service that's going to pull this data dynamically from an API and create a new record once a week or something like that. Whatever the case may be, I now have my social networks detail telling me where I can store the amount of Facebook likes, Twitter followers, and YouTube subscribers for some given date. Let's say I don't want it to be created on because the date I get this information might be different from the date I create the record. So let's add a new date field instead. Let's call it date social network stats checked instead of created on. All right. So now I can see how many Twitter followers, Facebook likes, YouTube subscribers, and whatever I need. Now that we have all of this set up, let's go ahead and save the page. All right, here we can see the changes have been applied successfully. All right, I'm not quite done in being able to use this detail. I still have one more step to make. So now that we have the object created in the database level, we have the layout created in the interface level, we now are going to go ahead and add the detail to our account page. Let's go ahead, open up one of our account records. And I'm going to go to the View menu and choose Open Section Wizard. If I open the section wizard from the View menu, I will be taken directly to the page designer. All right. Now that our section designer's opened up, let's go ahead and add this new detail. So here we have let's go and find the tab that we'd added. And now I can click on the new detail button here. Now I can go ahead and choose my new detail. This will be the social networks detail. The caption is going to be the same as the detail title itself. Now you're going to notice two more columns, detail column and object column. This is how we associate the detail with the section. We actually use the ID. When setting up a detail, you're setting up what's known as a many-to-many relationship. That means a record or a one-to-many relationship, where a record might have multiple entries for a detail. And the system has to solve the following issue. How do we display or how do we know which detail records to show for any given account record? For example, all of our account records are going to have this detail, not just this one record. And the system needs some way of knowing if I'm looking at global tech to show me the detail records associated with global tech, if I'm looking at world tech to show me the details associated with world tech. For this, we use the ID column that I'd mentioned. Remember that we created this lookup account that corresponds to the section that we're putting this in, accounts. And the thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to say that the ID value of the object that I'm in, this is the ID, or this is the account object, should be input to the account lookup that I show. The system is then going to look at this detail column. It's going to look at the ID value in the account lookup. And once it does, it's going to know exactly what record to show these detail records on. So here I've added detail social networks. This is all I have to do. I can now go ahead and safely hit this save button. In the configuration tab where you created the new object, there were several different sizes of text column in the detail section wizards. There's only one, which is it is the unlimited unlimited text string string column. So we can limit the amount of characters we want in a text string if we are designing the column on an object level. But if we're using the section wizard or the detail wizard or the mobile application wizard, it's always going to be an unlimited length text string column. All right, and again, we can see changes applied successfully. And again, if you remember from yesterday's training, before this shows up, we do need to hit Control F5 for it to appear in our browser. So I'm going to go ahead, clear my cache, and refresh the page. All right, and we can see here the social network tab that we had created. We can see the social network detail that we had created. Let's go ahead and add a record to the social network's detail. We can, so let's just put in some random numbers, random Twitter followers, random amount of Facebook likes, random amount of YouTube subscribers, and let's set today's date as the date social network stats have been checked. All right, and there we go. We can see the account. We can see the Facebook likes, recent followers, and YouTube subscribers. Now, there is an optional step 4. We don't actually need to see this account field here because, well, we're in the XT group account. This is not providing me any extra information. What I can do for an optional step 4 is hit the action menu. That's these 3 vertical dots. Go to the column setup screen. And then just remove it from my list setup. So I have Facebook likes, Twitter followers, and YouTube subscribers. That is all I need. And there we go. We've successfully created an entirely new detail. Why did date not show on that? Because it was not configured. Again, if we want the date to show up, then we do have to go column setup and add the date column to our list setup screen. To recap the process of creating a detail, step one is to create a detail in the database level in the configuration tab of our advanced settings using our object designer. Step two is to use the detail wizard to create a interface layout for the newly created object. Step three is to use the new detail button in the section wizard to add the created detail to a given section. Step four is optional, but we can use the column setup for our detail to change the way we see fields on the section page or on the record page. All right. Any additional questions people might have regarding our details? All right, looks like we are good to continue. So we've seen how our detail wizard works from start to finish. We can see that we've added an entirely new detail to our page. Let's take a look at the last wizard that we have, which is the mobile application wizard. Now, this one we're going to run through pretty quickly. So here we go. I'm going to open up the mobile application wizard. And if you don't know, the mobile application wizard looks a little bit like this. Let's see if I have the BPM Online mobile application installed. Yes, I do. This is the Windows Store version of the BPM Online mobile app. As far as I'm aware, basically identical, whether you're using the Windows Store version, whether you're using the Apple Store or the Android version, they all should be more or less identical. So let me go ahead and log into this particular demo. In the meantime, while we wait for the store to log in, let's take a look at the mobile application wizard. We already have a workplace set up that is the main workplace. What this allows us to do, it allows us to set access rights for the workplace so we can have different user roles, have different versions of the mobile application. And I can also set up settings right here, or set up sections that I want to see in my mobile application right here. So I can click Set up Sections. And we can see the basic sections available to us in the mobile app. In order to create a new one, all I have to do is hit the New button. For example, let's say I want to add the Ideas section. I can simply select it, then go to Page Setup to actually set up the page of the ideas. I just have subject and owner, which is probably enough. If I want to add more columns, I can go ahead and do so. Note that you only have a single column to add your fields to. There's not a lot of customization since you are working with pretty limited screen real estate in the mobile app. If you want, you can even add you can set this into groups, you can add a detail, but this is pretty good for now. We can just go ahead and hit save. Then in the list setup, we can choose what you see when we're just scrolling through the list, which is just going to be subject. We can add subtitles or additional columns. And again, if we have any details that we want to add, we can do that via detail setup. For example, if I can go into my accounts, I can go to Details Setup here. Hit the New Detail button. If I wanted to add, for example, something like social networks. Again, account and ID. Hit Save. Hit Save. And I'm pretty much set. If I want to save these changes again, all I have to do is hit the Save button. how can we access the demo mobile app? You should be able to download it from the App Store on whatever your chosen mobile device is. Just search for BPM Online. Should pop up without any issues. All right, changes have saved. We can exit out of the mobile application. We can exit out of the mobile app. So the mobile application wizard, as you saw, just basically gives us the same capabilities we have in the main site, just for the mobile app itself. How will this app be connected to the changes in this particular demo? When you put in the website for your app, when you put in the website, the BPM Online instance that you're going to be using, you can just put in the app. You can just put in the app address. You will need to re-synchronize, however, to actually see those changes. All right. So now we've covered all the three wizards that we can use to edit the interface of our sections, of our details, of our mobile application. Let's talk a little bit about our workplace setup and our lookups. Workplace setup is the first thing I'm going to discuss. We've already seen a hint of this as a response to one of the first questions we received during this training session. What the workplace setup allows us to do is it allows us to say to assign access rights and layouts to the different workplaces that we have here in our section pane. While by default, these workplaces correspond to products, so we have our general for the platform, we have our studio for the studio product, service for the service product, sales, marketing, contact center, and so on. This is actually done by convenience, and workplaces don't actually have to have any relation to the product in question. For example, let's say that I wanted to make a special workplace for my sales guys in Boston. So I'm going to call new user workplace and give this workplace a name. Let's say I just call it Boston Sales Office. From here, I'm going to add a few user groups. Which you can probably guess is going to be the Boston Sales Office. Then I'm going to add sections to the Boston Sales Office. These are the sections that they're going to see. For example, I can give them a very limited amount of sections. And say all they need to see is accounts, activities, email, feed, ideas, orders, opportunities, and contracts, and contacts. Now, this doesn't mean that the other sections are unavailable to them. If they receive a direct link to, let's say, an invoice or a contract record that is a link, a website link, barring any access rights to the contrary, they're going to be able to access that link. So this isn't really a security feature, but more a convenience feature. This way, whenever the Boston Sales Office logs in, they're going to have just these. They're going to have just these sections. They're not going to have to spend a lot of time switching through workplaces, looking for the sections that they need to work in. They'll just have all of them present to them. And you can mix and match sections from different products. The users will not be impacted as long as they have the access rights and licenses to access all of those products. So if you create a section that has, if you create a workplace that has sections from our service, sales, and marketing product, as long as the user has all three licenses, they'll be able to access all of the sections present in that workplace. To give you an example, let me add the supervisor user. Or rather the all employees, just so we can see how this shows up in our list. Again, we do have to control F5, clear a cache, and reload the page. And from here, we can see when we select our workplaces, we'll be able to see the Boston sales office included in that list. So that's a quick primer of how the workplaces function. One of the things I want to add is we can use workplaces to hide sections we don't want people to have access to by simply removing it from all of these workplaces. Though again, if you don't have the corresponding access rights, if given a direct link, people will still be able to click on that link and access the section. If you want to remove people's access to a specific section, you will have to open it up and then change the user groups included. Note that you cannot add specific users to a workplace. You can only add user groups to a workplace. These user groups are both organizational and functional roles. All right, one of the other things that I did want to cover is our lookups section. We've already talked about how lookups present themselves as either drop-down lists, or pop-up windows. But we haven't actually seen a new lookup be added. You don't recommend deleting a particular section right from the workspace, like I asked in the beginning. Sorry, I may have misunderstood your question. I don't advise deleting sections from on the object level. But one of the ways we can hide sections from use is to remove them from the workplace. let's very quickly create a new lookup in our account section. Let's say that to help out my London and my Boston workers, I'm going to have an extra layer of segmentation for my accounts. I'm going to call this layer of segmentation territories. These territories are just going to be geographic territories like North America, South America, or North America, Latin America, EU, CIS, Mideast, and so on. And I'm going to add this new lookup to all of my account records. So I'm going to go View, Open Section Wizard, and again, we're going to go to the Page Designer and create a new lookup since we have not actually seen how that functions. So I'm going to drag a new lookup for my new column section here. I'm going to put it in the segmentation area and call this territory. Let's call this geographic territory. It's not required. I'm not going to be selecting an existing lookup. I'm going to be adding a new lookup. And again, I'm going to call this new lookup exactly the way I called it here, geographic territory, USR geo territory. It's going to be a list since I'm going to have 6 or 7 entries at most. I don't need to click through a whole extra window. A list suffices. Check the make copy box and hit save. Then I'm going to go ahead and again save this page. All right, our changes have been applied successfully. I'm going to hit OK. And again, Control F5 to see the lookup appear on my record page. Here we have geographic territory. Note that there are no values that we can choose from yet. In order to add some values to this lookup, I'm going to go to my lookup section. And as a shortcut, I can actually use the Studio Workplace and just select lookups from this list. Then let's click on all, add filter, and let's go ahead and try to find the geographic territory lookup, which is right here. Ignore this new lookup button. It is kind of misleading, doesn't actually do anything. And I had all geographic territory. I can open this up now. In order to add a new value to this lookup, all I have to do is hit the new button and give my new value a name, such as North America. And there we go. I've very quickly added all of my 7 new territories to my lookup. Now, if I go back to any of my accounts, I can easily assign them whatever territory they should belong in. For example, Global Venture is located in New York City. I can easily set its geographic territory to North America. All right, and there we are. We've now created a new lookup, and we've given that lookup a bunch of values. I do want to mention that we have quite a few lookups in the system. To be honest, there's a lot more lookups than we reliably have time for to cover. Most of them are pretty self-explanatory. Whenever you see a lookup that you want to add values to in an existing section, just go ahead, hover the lookup section, find the lookup that you need, and then open it up. If you're looking for some specific lookup that has to do with the functionality of a section, such as case deadline resolution schema, rules for connecting emails to system sections, mailbox integration, and so on, that's all covered during our, or at least the product-specific lookups are covered during the full CRM bundle training. So I'm not going to go through each and every lookup that we do have, since, as I mentioned, there are quite a few of those, but you can always feel free to skim through them. Or if you need some specific lookup, you can just find what it's called in whatever section you see this lookup in, and then use our filters to find and narrow down that lookup. All right. And with that, we have reached the hour-and-a-half mark. So let's go ahead and take a quick 10-minute break. Think about the functionality you've seen so far. If you do have any additional questions regarding anything that we've covered up to this point, do let me know via the chat panel. Otherwise, thank you for listening. We'll be back in about 10 minutes. Let's go ahead and continue on with today's webinar. Now, I see we had a couple of questions over the break. So let me take a moment to answer them before we continue. Sorry if I missed it, but when will we be covering creating a pop-up lookup? To create a pop-up lookup, the only thing that's different than a list is simply to select a different option in the lookup box. So if we go to the section wizard right here, Then, for example, if we were to take a look at the geographical territory lookup that we just created, you'll notice that there are two options here, list and pop-up window. So simply by choosing a different option, I can create either a pop-up window or a list. So it's the only difference between creating a list and pop-up window is the option that you have selected here in the lookup view. Can we have multi-column dictionaries or lookups like lists of states in different countries, all entries in a single dictionary? No. Unfortunately, we don't yet have this functionality, though I do know that we are working on developing it for later versions. When we talk about MS Word printables and printing documents, actually we're going to get to that in this second half of our training. So keep watching, and we're going to get to it sooner or later. All right. Now as we move on to the second half of this training, I do want to show you guys a quick presentation. Bear with me for one moment. All right, you should see the presentation here. And we're just going to quickly run through some of the things that we're going to be looking over for the rest of today's training section, and whatever we don't get to, we will, of course, cover tomorrow. Quickly, we're going to see a presentation on our system architecture. We've already seen how we create details, and I've talked a little bit about exactly what happens in the back end, but here you'll be given a little bit more information on how all of this fits together. Then we'll take a look at some additional management tools, including the changelog, and we're going to end by taking a look at our system, at our printable forms and integration. All right. So let's start off by taking a look at the system architecture of BPM Online. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because, to be honest, most of what I'm going to be telling you is not exactly useful in day-to-day implementation, but it is critical to have at least a passing idea of how it functions in the back end. So let's talk about the infrastructure of BPM Online. This is going to play in why we do things like clearing the cache and so on. So on a very basic level, we start with some internet-connected device with a browser or the mobile app. The site itself is hosted on an application server or IIS server. The site itself refers to the actual layout, the buttons you click, the stuff that you actually interact with on the website. All that is hosted on the application server. However, none of the data in the site is hosted in the application server. The data is instead stored in a SQL server. This is a standard database server where we have all of our separate tables. Each table is an object. Each field is a column, and so on. So if you were wondering why we refer to fields as columns, it's because we are literally referring to columns in the table in the SQL database. However, that isn't all where we store all the data. We also make use of two additional servers, the session server, or the Redis server, and the version control server, or SVN. The Redis server is also a pretty important thing to keep in mind because it explains why we have to clear a cache and reload the page each time. What the session server does is it caches, that is, it stores information in an easily accessible place for the application server in order to speed up system function. Whenever we have to load new data in the system, the application server has to send a query request to the SQL server. And there are pretty strict time limitations on how fast an SQL query can be accomplished. However, this query time is incredibly reduced if we're not asking for the data each time, but we're pulling it from a predefined source. You can think of this as, to use a dirty metaphor, having to go through a library to find a specific book and a specific page, or having the necessary data written on a flashcard. The flashcard is the session server, the Redis server. It's a quick way the application server can see what data is already there. By caching data, obviously, we improve site performance and site speed. And this actually applies to sections that you go to regularly and records that you access regularly. For example, if we keep using the account section and we keep going to a specific record in the account section, that data is going to get cached, and it's going to load a little faster each time we access it, because we are refreshing less data each time we're accessing the page. Whenever we make a change on the section level, so we're adding a new column to a section, we're adding a new object, we have to clear our cache and refresh the browser in order to have the system not rely on the cache data, which is not updated, but instead, again, craft an entirely new query to the SQL server and get the upgraded data, or the updated data. And of course, to handle things like smooth upgrades and seamless updating and so on, we use an SVN to handle all of that. That is the version control server. So you can go to sleep, wake up, and you have an entirely updated site. And that is seamless with no effort required on your part. It's all due to the SVN that we use. So that's how we actually access BPM Online. But inside BPM Online, we also have a specified structure, and we've already seen a hint of this with our packages. Let's talk a little bit more about what packages are, and this is especially important to know if you're going to be a partner, if you're going to be developing some kind of customizations or new functionalities for BPM Online. You'll see why in a moment. So a package is kind of the lowest level of organization within BPM Online itself. You can think of it just as a folder that stores some related amounts of business objects, modules, business processes, pages, and so on. For example, the custom package contains all of the customizations made in BPM Online. But that isn't the only kind of package we have. We also have, if you remember from earlier in today's training, core system packages. And these packages contain whatever necessary objects we need for a single slice of system functionality. We're going to see that a little more detail when we go back to the configuration section. There are kind of two kinds of packages, a little bit more, but for our purposes, thinking of them as two kinds of packages is kind of all right. Basic packages, these are the uneditable core packages, product packages that we get when we purchase a BPM Online product. These include basic packages, core packages, enterprise, and so on. But we also have user packages. This is the custom package. And as we're going to see, whatever other custom packages we create ourselves. And user packages contain things, user features, and so on, and of course, the custom package. In order for the packages to all work together in a nice way and not conflict, we establish a strict hierarchy for them. Notice here I have a little diagram of a package hierarchy. These arrows show how each package flows from the others. To explain, let's take a look at package D, and we can see little arrows pointing from package B and C. We see an arrow pointing from the partner package and so on. What this means is that package D contains the functionality from package B and package C. These lines show how functionality is passed from package to package. However, let's take a look at package B. Here, we do not have any connection to package C. What that means is there is no functionality shared between B and C. Whatever we do to package B is not going to affect package C and vice versa. However, it is going to affect package D since both package B and package C go into this package. If you're a partner, one of the things that you're going to learn how to do, that I'm going to show you how to do, is to create your own packages. And one of the things we recommend is, in terms of best practice, is to create a partner package where you're going to be storing whatever partner customizations you make. And this should be separate from the custom package. The reason it should be separate is that whenever you're going to be debugging certain functionality, you're going to be adding some new details or whatever the case may be, it's very good to be able to separate who created what. For example, if you've added some kind of customization for your customer and then your customer adds customization on top of that and the entire thing breaks without having a differentiation in who created what, it's going to be hard to tell what to fix. Was it the customer's customizations that fixed it? Was it the partner's functionality that broke the section? Was it all together? Maybe there was some inbuilt bug. How do we know which customizations was the customer's, which customization was the partner's, and so on? So we do recommend creating a partner package. We're going to see a little later on exactly how we can create this in the back end. The custom package, by default, contains functionality of every single other package in the system, allowing us to edit every single bit of functionality in the system. And whenever we create our own packages, we'll also have to keep that in mind. And this will make a little bit more sense when we check out the partner dependencies or the package dependencies tab in our configuration section later on. You can see custom package can access functionalities of package A, B, and D. What we cannot do in the custom package, however, is edit the functionalities of package C because there is no connection between the custom package and package C. We would have to set up that hierarchy in order to do so. All right. So again, that was a quick run through through the architecture of BPM Online. Again, I'm not going to spend too much time on it, mostly because this is not exactly critical information as a whole, but it is crucial to know at least the basics of how it goes on. If you do want to learn more about the architecture and so on, then I do recommend you sign up for our developers trainings that you can find on the academy.bpmonline.com/trainings website. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about packages, since if you are a partner, you're probably going to be making some customizations for your clients, and it is important to know exactly what goes into these customizations and how you should sort them. So we're once again in our configuration tab, and we're going to take the time to actually go through and explore all the different features that are applicable to us as analysts. Now, a lot of the stuff here is really only going to be important to developers, but I'm going to cover everything that we want to know as analysts, as system admins, and so on. We've already seen how we can add a object to create a detail to our to our schemas, but we can also add what is known as a replacing object. A replacing object allows us to replace an existing section. Let's say, for example, that I wanted to add to my account object. Well, let's not take account since we already have account. Let's say I wanted to add to my opportunities object an extra currency field. Remember that currency type fields are not a field that we can act via the section wizard. So in order for me to have this currency field present in my opportunities section, I have to add a replacing object. I have to replace the existing opportunities section with my own. This is actually done almost identically to how we would set up an object for detail, except here in the inheritance for our parent object, we're going to select the section that we want to replace, in this case, opportunity. You'll notice that the replace parent box is both faded out and checked. And from here, I can just go add additional currency field and add whatever, and then set up the field however I need to. And then in my section wizard, I would then have this field available to drag out into my interface. So that's the main use we would use for replacing objects whenever we need to add a non-standard field to an existing section. We can also add business processes, but pretty much everything else, test modules, replacing pages, schemas, source codes, and so on, that's all developer involved, but we can add business processes from here as well. Now, the thing I really wanted to show you guys is a little tab we have here called Package Dependencies. And this is going to show exactly how each package in our system, and remember that these packages all contain some amount of functionality. So if let's say I wanted to add some kind of functionality to the calendar package, or to the calendar functionality that we have. So I'd first find this calendar functionality here. So here we have the calendar functionality, and then I would see exactly what inheritances it has. So here we have calendar base. I can see it right here. And this is actually kind of a reverse pyramid. The top layer is the very basic functionality of the system, base and core functionalities. Then I can just click on a given package to see exactly where it takes additional functionality from. So for example, the calendar base functionality takes its functionality from the base, from mobile, content builder, bulk email, mobile design tools, wizards, UIV2, ML, file import, so on and so forth, down my list until I hit calendar. So if I wanted to modify some behavior of the calendar package, I would have to create a new package and set its dependencies in a way that it is inheriting everything from here. To actually create a new package, all I need to do is right-click here in the Packages section and choose the Add button. We get a little pop-up window that's going to give us, that's going to tell us to add a name. So let's call this package Partner Package. The name cannot have spaces. We can leave the position, version control system repository, all of that blank. Description we can leave blank, and everything else, just hit OK. Once we do, the package will be created and saved to the system. But again, if we want our partner package to actually make any or contain changes to any functionality, we're going to have to set its dependencies correctly. So I can find my partner package here, right-click and hit Edit. Again, I'll get a little pop-up. You'll notice the dependent package custom has already been set. The custom package will always be dependent on every single other package in the system. But if I want my partner package to be able to edit something, I'm going to have to add the depends on packages as well. Base, calendar base, so on, whatever functionality I want to edit, I need to add to my depends on packages here. Again, to save your dependencies, all you have to do is click OK. Now, a question I get pretty frequently is, especially from partners, is they ask me, well, I've done a bunch of customization on my in my partner sandbox, and I'm not really sure how to transfer this to a client. I don't want to have to redo all this work that I've already done and tested in my sandbox. I don't want to have to redo it all by hand in a client's production instance. So what can I do? Well, luckily, one of the options that you may have noticed when I'm right-clicking on a package is Export Package to Archive. What this is going to do is actually, as you can probably guess, export a zip file of all the things contained in the package. So you can see I have a package called partner package with the date.zip. Inside I have some DG package, and inside that I have a file. If I want, if I'm a partner and I go export, so I have, let's pretend I have all of my dependencies set, I've done a bunch of customizations, and I use this export function. How do I get it into my client system? Well, I'm going to open up their system. I'm going to go to the advanced settings, and right here I have something called import from file in my actions. And I can select this. I can choose the file I just downloaded, hit open, and hit load. And that's going to import the package wholesale into my system, along with whatever objects, pages, and business processes, and so on that I've customized. Of course, this is a very much a non-technical, non-developer way of doing so. If you're a developer, then we, in our developing trainers, we do show how to create an SVN server, how to create a pipeline so you can just pipe things from your directly from your sandbox or development environment to your client's production environment without having to go through all of this. But again, that is covered during the developers training. And if you're not planning to do any development, planning to do analyst or non-developer customizations, then the export and import functionality that we have here will serve fine. How do you know which package defines a particular function, for example, accounts? Well, the best way would be to find the package called accounts, or if there's no package called accounts, then check the base and core packages. For example, the base account package is stored in the base package. So we have base 7.8 and the counts in that. Then if I want to see exactly what dependencies it has, I can just go into my package dependencies tab in my configuration. And then select my base package. I can see my base package is one of the core packages and it affects pretty much everything I have in my system. Otherwise, for product packages, the package name will give you a hint of what the functionality is stored within it. Or you can just use the search box. All right. So that's all talking about packages. And again, this information most of the time is not going to be useful, though if you are a partner, you're going to be creating some customizations. I highly recommend you create your own partner package in which you're going to be putting those customizations in. But we're not done with the advanced settings section just yet. I want to talk about two more very important things for us to know. That is our license manager and the changelog. Let's start with the license manager. In the upper right-hand corner of your advanced settings, you're going to find this little gear button. In that gear button, you're going to see a bunch of options. Set up a list of email providers, configure social network accounts, manage user licenses, generate metadata, open integration laws, and import data. Now, some of these functions are actually a little bit obsolete. For example, the import data tool is actually obsolete here. You should use our import data tool from the section designer instead. However, the license manager is still the same functional tool that we've always had. The license manager is how you get new licenses in the system. For example, take the following situation. Let's say that you have been using BPM Online for a couple of months and you want to expand its use. You want to expand its use in your organization, and you do that by purchasing new licenses. So you go ahead and you call your customer success manager, your partner account manager, whomever, and say, I want to purchase 5 new sales licenses for my BPM Online instance. Great, you get the order form, you get the invoice, you pay, and you go to sleep that day. You wake up the next morning, log into your instance, and you still have the same amount of licenses you did before purchasing. That's because you haven't actually uploaded the licenses into your system. There is no magic way to upload the licenses just via the license manager. In order to receive new licenses in your BPM Online instance, you have to perform the following steps. The first is open up your license manager in your advanced settings section. You'll see a window like this with a list of licenses, when they start, how long they're valid for, the type of licenses, how many you have, and you're going to be able to see the distributed licenses here in the distributed licenses tab. Of course, this is a demo version. None of this is actually functional since demos do not have licenses to distribute. Next, you're going to click the following button, Request License. This will download something called a TLR file to your computer. It will be called license-request.tlr. Then email this license request file along with your customer ID to our support team at support@bpmonline.com. And in your body, you can write something like, I purchased X amount of licenses yesterday. Can I please have them? Can I please have my license form updated? Our support team will then email you back the same file. And what you're going to need to do is then hit the Upload Licenses button. Choose the license request file from your that our support team has emailed back to you and hit OK. And that's going to upload the new licenses into your system. And after that, you're going to be able to distribute them, create new users, and so on. The license manager is pretty nifty bit of functionality you should be aware of if you do plan to purchase more BPM licenses and some future date. If anyone has any questions about our license manager, I'll be happy to answer them now. Otherwise, I'm going to move straight on to our changelog. Another very common question I've received is how do we know who changed a record? Hi, Romeo, can you show again how to access the license manager? Sure, I can show you guys one more time. Go into the advanced settings. So this is System Designer. You get to by just clicking on that little gear button. Scroll all the way down until you see Admin Area. Then click on Advanced Settings. From here, click on the gear button in the upper right-hand corner and choose Manage User Licenses. And that's going to open up the License Manager. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the changelog. As I'd mentioned, very often I have a question of, Romeo, how can we see how a record has been changed over time? Well, we do have, in most of our sections, does have the modified by and modified on columns. Remember that when we inherited from our base object when we were creating a detail, we'd actually seen this modified on column. Or we'd actually seen that the modified by and modified on columns are standard columns that each object in BPM line has to have. So we can always tell the person who has opened up a record and made even the smallest change, such as typing a space in a full name field. And my modified on, modified by column is actually going to reflect to show me who did this last. But if I have a lot of people working with the same record, I'm not exactly going to be able to tell who did what and when. In order for me to see who did what and when, I need to enable my changelog. The changelog will actually show me who did what to what section. We can set it up by going to the changelog in our advanced settings. And then here in the data tab, click on this little button. It looks like a little triangle inscribed within a circle. One of the options that we have here is the setup log option. Let's go ahead and select it. From my setup log option, I can now hit the new button. When setting up a changelog, what you're actually doing is you're choosing an object to track. For example, let's say I wanted to track the account object. Then you don't just track the entire object. You instead track specific fields in an object. This is because each additional field that we track, each additional column that we track, takes additional processing power of the site and results in a site performance decrease. Now, if you're just looking at a couple of columns across a couple of objects, you're not going to experience any sort of decrease in human noticeable terms. It'll be in fractions of milliseconds of that. On the other hand, if you decide to track every single field in a dozen different objects, then your site will run significantly slower. This is why we have both nothing set up in the changelog and why we have the changelog be selectable by column instead of just saying I want to track everything in an object. For example, let's say that for an account, I want to track the following: its name, its owner, and let's say its category. So I'm going to add those to my logged columns list. Just click on them and then hit the either add or remove button. So this arrow to move a column from all fields to log columns, and this arrow to remove a column from all fields to log columns. And then once that's done, I can hit OK. The system is now going to take a little bit of time to actually enable logging of those columns. What's happening on the database side is the system is actually creating a new set of columns where it's simply going to copy the change made to those columns. There we go. We've added the account object to our track columns. Now take a look at my data field. So first I'm going to refresh the page just so we can see all the show up. And I'm going to clear all the filters here. And note that, well, there's actually nothing here. That's because tracking is never retroactive. Tracking only takes place after the changelog has been enabled. So if you want to track some fields, some section from day one, for example, I want to know who creates new records in the idea section, then I would have to set that up before anyone has gone or accessed the idea section. And only then can I see when these sections are created. The log, when we're editing, when a user edits a field that we're tracking in an object that we're tracking. So for counted as name, owner, and category. Let's just go ahead and we're going to make some changes here to the name, owner, and category of a couple of accounts. So I'm going to go to Global Venture, change its category to A, change its owner to John Best. Note, when I do this, I'm not going to know what the initial values were because I did not have tracking set up when those initial values were entered. So do keep that in mind. So now I've changed this to A, John Best. And let's go to Goldfish Technologies. I'm going to change this to GF Tech. Change the owner to Valerie Murphy. Change the category to C. Maybe I'll go to Leoline and do the same thing. So I've made a couple of different changes. Now, the way it's going to be reflected in my changelog when I go ahead and refresh this page is the following. So I can see the name, who was modified by, when it was modified, and the operation performed. If I create a new record, so go new account, call this Apple, go ahead and save. I'm going to go in, set an owner for this. So the owner is supervisor, and set the category to A. And again, let's refresh. I'm going to see Apple operation inserted. Inserted just means add, updated means edit, and removed means delete. If I go back and remove, let's say, the owner for Apple, I can see that it has been updated. In order for me to actually see the changes in the record, I can select it, choose View Changes in Selected Record. That's going to open up a little box. It's going to tell me exactly what's been changed. From here, I can actually set up the columns that I want to see, or I can even set up the columns that I want to see here. For example, I can click on this little down arrow that pops up when I hover over the column titles. I can do set up columns and add name, since I am tracking that, owner, and category, and hit OK. Now, if I sort historically, I'm going to be able to see exactly what changes were made, so what the values were and what the values were changed to. Again, I do not have initial values because I did not have tracking set up when these values changed. But for something like Apple, I can actually see this changes. So I can see, for example, that at 12/21, I had updated this Apple record. So here the Apple record was inserted with the owner supervisor with no category. Here it was updated to have the category. And here it was updated to remove the owner. Again, if I want to see the initial values for records so I can compare all of this later on, I need to set up changelog tracking before users are in the system. And then I will be able to see when records were created, what the initial values were, when these records were created, so on and so forth. All right. Anyone have any questions about our changelog? I'll be happy to answer them now. Otherwise, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next portion of today's training. All right, let's go ahead and move on. So we've seen our changelog. But one thing the changelog didn't actually, I do see we have a question. How do we see exactly what data has been changed or inserted? Sorry, I skipped it. Sure, I can just show you this again quickly. Here in the changelog, for me to actually see what values have been changed, I can just, here where we have our categories, or where we have the column titles, I can click on the down arrow and select set up columns and just go ahead and add the columns that I'm tracking to my selected columns. It's going to bring them out on my onto my screen, and from here I can see, okay, here a record was created and it had an owner but no category. Here it was updated to add a category, and I can just see no category, category. And here, no owner, owner. How quickly can these log files grow? They can grow as quickly as people are editing, adding, or removing data from whatever section you're tracking and whatever fields you're tracking. Best practice is to only track those fields and those objects that are entirely critical to know. So if there are some things that are absolutely critical to know who has changed them when, track that and nothing else. Don't just track everything because you feel like it, because you're curious. Track only those things that are critical to know if someone has changed the value of. All right. So we've seen the changelog, but one of the things we haven't seen is the following question. What happens if a user is created? That user makes some changes to something we're tracking, and then that user is deleted. I'm going to give you a hint. That's not going to show up in our changelog. Or rather it is, it's just going to have modified by be blank, which is as useless as not knowing, not setting up tracking at all. Luckily, we do have a way to track supervisor level activities such as creating users, changing access rights, and so on. And that is done via the audit log. Now, by default, Again, for performance-related issues, the audit log is disabled. In order to enable the audit log, you need to contact our support at support@bpmonline.com and request that they activate the audit log on your BPM Online instance. The audit log will show you the administrator who had created, deleted, edited users, created, deleted, edited user roles, edited operation permissions or access rights, and other high-level administrative actions. You'll be able to view all of that in your audit log. So again, if you do want to be able to track admin level changes such as creating users, removing users, changing access rights, and so on, then you will need to email our support team at support@bpmonline.com and request that they enable the audit log for your instance. All right, so we've covered almost all of the various things that we can set up. But there is one more thing that I wanted to mention. And that is our operation permissions. Now, I remember yesterday someone had a question about how can we control, when we were covering our access rights, someone had asked how can we control access to who can create printables, for example. All of that is done via our operation permissions. And operation permissions basically control all of the different operations that we perform in the system that doesn't exactly relate to editing, reading, or viewing data. Again, there are quite a few operation permissions. Printables is one of them. So if I search for something containing printables, once this loads a little bit more, we'll be able to see duplicate processing, for example, corporate tag management, shared mailbox synchronization setup, view audit log. We can actually control who does that, who can manage user licenses, who can perform import and export operations, who has the ability to change access rights, and so on. We can all see that here in our operation permissions. If I wanted to give someone temporary access to some given operation, for example, the import function or the import operation, I could open it up, Excel import. And then below, we can see the operation permission detail. By default, only users in the system administrator role can do so. But let's say I wanted to give Valerie the ability to import her personal contact list. I can just quickly hit the plus sign, find the user, V. Murphy, and then just change the access level from a check mark to an empty box. If it's checked, she has the ability. Then once she's completed the import, I can simply uncheck it, and she no longer has the ability to perform the import operation. This goes for any of the options that I need, or any of the operations that I care about. Open it up, add whatever user or role you want to have the operation, give them access, and then when they no longer need the access, simply uncheck the box. How to control access to a specific printable document. If you want to control access to a specific printable, then you can just find the printable in the printables lookup. And we're going to see printables a little later. I think actually just in a few moments, we're going to go into our printables. And we can actually change access rights for a specific printable here. Well, we're going to get to that in just a moment. Before we do, I did want to go through very quickly another system section that is pretty expansive, but we aren't really going to go into each detail, and that is the the system settings section in our system designer. This is right under lookups. We have system settings. Like lookups, there are a lot of system settings. For ease of use, we have separated them into folders. Though again, we still have some general folders, things like default values, configurations, and so on. Again, there's not really a good way to know exactly what each system setting is, but just to go through them whenever you need to. A lot of the system settings that have to that pertain to the operation of some specific product is covered during the full CRM product training. But we do still have quite a few different system settings that just really need to be scrolled through. What I recommend if you do plan to do any heavy-duty customization on the BPM Online platform would be at some point just open up and take a look at each system setting, what it's called. The name will usually give you enough information to tell you exactly what that system setting does. Probably one of the more important system settings to remember to set up when you're implementing the system for the first time is are the system settings in the passwords folder. And as you can probably guess, this all has to do with password security, where we can indicate different password complexity requirements. We can indicate whether someone is going to be locked out of a password, how many login attacks it takes before they're locked out, how long they're locked out for, whether we show them a login message or not, and importantly, if we want users to update their password every so often, for example, once a month, once every 2 months, we can set a value for the password validity term in days. For example, I can say that passwords are only valid for 30 days, and that will force users to reset their password once a month. But again, there are a couple of hundred system settings. Uh, 466. So it's not really realistic to go through each and every one. I would just recommend at some point go ahead and scroll through the system setting folders that interest you the most. All right. Let's get to something that people have been asking quite a few questions about, and that is our printables. The first thing I want to mention is that our printables are stored in a lookup in the lookup section. So go ahead, go to your lookup section and find the lookup called printable. By the way, since printables are a lookup, if you ever want to go in and control access to a specific printable, you just go in, find the printable lookup in our access rights, and enable manage by records. And you can set up whatever default permission rules you need per printable, or of course, in the printable records themselves. So let's go to our lookups. I'm going to find the printable lookup here. Again, it is called printable. And we can open it up by hitting the open contact button here. You'll notice that we have a couple of printables in the system already. And there are two types of printables we can create: Microsoft Word and DevExpress printables. DevExpress printables do require a developer to create. So we're going to be talking about just Microsoft Word printables. First, let's take a look at what exactly a printable is. You may have noticed that in some of our sections, such as orders, we have this little button called print. When I click on it, the system is going to download either a PDF or a Microsoft Word file to my local machine. As you can see here, order.pdf. I can open it up, and it's going to give me some information taken from the record. So it's going to, in this case, it's going to show me the products I've purchased, their quantity, their price, and so forth. Setting all of that up requires my printable lookup here. For example, let's take a look at that order printable. Here I have my orders, Microsoft Word. I can just go ahead and hit edit. And that's going to open up this little field right here. We can see the name of the printable, the section that this printable is found in, and whether the print button is in the section, is in the card, that is that little this little thing that opens up when I click on it, and whether it is converted to PDF or saved as a .doc file. A printable consists of two separate parts. The first is fields of printable, and the second is tables of printable. The fields of printable refers to fields from the section. So if we go and look at that printable once more, the fields are things like the name of the client, the address, the order number, the date, the signed, the total, and so on. So all of these are fields. They are fields taken directly from the section in question, which is the order section. The second part is the tables of printable. These tables of printables show us data taken from other objects, such as details or other sections. In our order printable, this corresponds to the products, because product in order is a separate detail from the order section, and the installment plan, which is also a separate detail from the order section. Let's go ahead and we want to create, let's say that we want to create a quote form on our opportunities. So we're going to create an entirely new printable for the opportunity section. Let's go ahead and hit the new button and choose Microsoft Word. And then set the name and section. So our name is going to be quote form, and the section is going to be opportunities. This is where we are going to be printing the printable from. So here we have quote form and the section opportunities. Let's say that we want this quote form to be sent as a PDF, so we're going to be clicking convert to PDF. And we want to be able to print it directly from the section list, so we're going to choose show and card. Once that's done, we need to set up the fields, that is, the fields we want from the opportunity section present in our printable, and then whatever tables we need. So let's think about what goes into a quote form. Probably, let's start with the basics. So we're going to hit set up a list of fields, and we're going to add the account name, and we're going to add the contact. We're going to add the customer's need, let's say. Let's add the name of the opportunity, the sales manager handling the sale. Let's say we're going to add the customer's budget if necessary. But probably this is close enough. So we have some basic opportunities. If we want, we can add when this form was created. So add created on, or when this opportunity was created. Add created on there. Can we check both show and section, show and card checkboxes? Yes, we can. So I've added a bunch of different columns to this opportunity. If I wanted, I could actually go into more detail by creating aggregate columns. I could add more account information. Let's say I wanted to add the account primary phone number and the account address. For the contact, I could add his name, but as well I can add the contact's job title. If I don't want to use the contact's full name, I can use their recipient's name. Or whatever other connected objects to this opportunity I want, whatever other connected information to this opportunity I want. But let's say, in terms of the fields necessary, that this is enough for me. However, I still need to send them some quotes, right? So a quote includes the name of the product and a price at the very least. So I'm going to have to add a table for the opportunity products. Could you also add images to printables? Yes, we're going to get to that in a few moments here. So I also need to add some tables to this printable. Specifically the opportunity product table. So I'm going to save my changes here. And then I'm going to select the object that I'm adding. So this is taking data from a separate object. Oops. So new, and I have a detail called opportunity product. And you'll notice everything else actually fills out automatically. And again, I need to set up my list of fields. And from here, I can now add the product in question, the quantity, when it was quoted on, and the price. If I want to add something like an image, I'll have to go into the product and add the product image as well. Someone's asking, can we add a QR code regarding product serial number? Sure. If on the product we have a field that stores the QR code, or we simply have a field that stores the product code, for example, I can add that as well. Then go ahead and hit OK, and these are going to be the fields from the product opportunity that I'm actually from the opportunity product detail that I'm actually going to show in my quote form. If I want to add some filtrations, for example, maybe I don't want to ever quote, for whatever reason, products with a quantity less than 5. I can add a new condition, say that if the product, an opportunity product, quantity is less than 5 or is greater than 5 to show it. Then anything less than 5 will, of course, be filtered out. So just an example, sometimes you may need to create printables that have some automatic filtration already. We can set that up in the table filter section. But otherwise, I have my fields set up. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. Now, I'm not done. I can't use this printable just yet. I'm still missing a very critical portion, and that is actually setting up the printable. Luckily, we do have a solution for this. And the solution is a Microsoft Word plugin. This plugin is only for Microsoft Word on Windows. So if you have a Chromebook, or you have a Linux machine, or an Apple machine, I'm afraid you're a bit out of luck in that regard. You do need to have Microsoft Word on a Windows machine to be able to use the BPM Online plugin. You can actually request this plugin again from our support team. Just email support@bpmonline.com and ask them for a download link to the plugin. And they'll happily provide you with one. It's a standard install package. Go ahead and install the plugin. Once you do, in your Microsoft Word instance, you're going to have this BPM Online tag appear. And from there, I'm going to show you exactly how this works. So this is a standard Word document. What I'm going to do first is click over to this BPM Online tab, and then click on the Connect button on the left-hand side of the screen. From here, I need to set up the server that I am connecting to. So here we have the server field. I'm going to hit a plus sign and hit the New button. Now I have to give a name and the link to my BPM Online instance. So I'm just going to copy the name, the address of my instance, just paste that in twice, hit OK, and then put in my username and password. The configuration will always be default. You never have to worry about that. Just go ahead and hit OK. The system will now log in to your BPM Online instance. What can you do instead if you don't have a Windows PC? Unfortunately, creating the plugin is going to be very difficult, or creating the printable is going to be very difficult. I very highly recommend you find a Windows PC with a working version of Word in order to set them up. Once the system is logged in, we're going to be able to select our printables. So after a moment, this system, Microsoft Word is going to load into the printables we have. For example, here we have opportunities, quote form. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. Now you're going to get a warning. Microsoft Word file already exists for the BPM Online template. If you load the current file in BPM Online, the previous one will be deleted. Continue, sure. We don't actually have a template, so I don't care about overwriting anything. Now, to set up the printable, I can actually do all of my standard Microsoft Word tools. This is a standard Microsoft Word document. So if I want to include images, fonts, whatever it is, I can do all of that. The only thing the system is going to do is, you'll notice on the left-hand side, we have quote form printable fields. In order for me, for the system to dynamically generate content from the object in question onto the printable, I just need to drag out these following fields. So click and drag them to wherever I want them to be. That is literally all. So let's say I wanted to have a huge BPM Online logo in the middle of this page. So insert, let's say pictures. Let's see if I can find my BPM Online logo picture. Just put it right there. Say I want a header. And I can go ahead and obviously fill out whatever I need. And to create the table, I can either create my table again using my standard Microsoft Word tools, or I can actually just click and drag this onto a space in my document, and that's actually automatically going to formulate a table for me. If I add whatever, any different fonts, any italics, underlines, what have you, all of that is also going to be taken into account. And I can go ahead and save this file. And I do this by going to BPM Online and then save in BPM Online. If I want to save this template to create other printables from, I can actually just save it as a document. But in this case, I care about saving in BPM Online, so that's what I'm going to go ahead and do. And once it's done, it's going to be available to me in BPM Online. So let's go now, find some opportunity. Let's find some opportunity with a bunch of products involved. Make sure we have some products listed. Perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and again, Control F5. You want to refresh in order to see that option appear here. And once you do, here we have the print button. Let's go ahead again. I just want to quickly check that we have our products included here. Yep. So let's go ahead and hit that print button and take a look at how our printable now looks. Here we have our quote form downloaded. I can open it up and we have it right here. So BPM Line quote form software prepared for Axiom 36 Harbor Street, prepared by Mary King on this date at this time. Here the product listed. Of course, I can clean up the product names and clean up this table a little bit, but we have it displayed a little bit like this. All right. So that's going to be it for today's training session. I can see we have a couple of questions, so we'll take some time to answer those before we end today. Otherwise, thank you very much for listening. If you do have any questions, you can always let me know. I'm going to take another 5 or 10 minutes to answer whatever outstanding questions there are. And again, thank you very much for listening. I hope to see you tomorrow for tomorrow's training.